Well, are you one of those school kids whose history teacher proudly told you how Canada and the United States shared the longest undefended border in the world? Yeah, forget that. The U.S. Customs and Border Patrol is assembling a high fleet of high-tech Predator drones that will someday keep the entire border under 24-hour surveillance. In fact, the first spy planes are already in the air. They're flying out of a military base in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And earlier this year, in the dead of winter, the U.S. Border Agency gave our security correspondent, Bill Gillespie, exclusive access to the very heart of that operation.
It is very much just like sitting in front of your computer.
Staring intently at the TV screen, joystick in hand, Will Cyber looks a lot like a kid playing a video game. In actual fact, he's patrolling the Canada-U.S. border. From a trailer inside a hangar in Grand Forks, Cyber is flying a $10 million unmanned Predator B remote-controlled aircraft, packed with the latest aerial surveillance technology.
And the drone is so high that I can't hear it, I can't see it, and so any intruder, whether it was a smuggler, a terrorist, someone just trying to cross the border illegally, would never know the drone is up there above them.
Smugglers carrying backpacks of marijuana over the BC-Washington state border are of particular interest to the U.S. Border Patrol. Cyber says the drone's cameras are so advanced he can identify someone's facial features from 8 kilometers away.
A cigarette will show up brighter than anything else we'll see. It's even though it's so small, it's so concentrated and gives off so much heat that it just stands out plain as day.
The Predators began patrolling the U.S.-Mexican border 4 years ago. But it's taken the U.S. Border Agency a while to convince the U.S. Federal Aviation Commission that remote-controlled aircraft can be flown safely in the much busier skies of the northern U.S. But earlier this year, the FAC gave the green light to Predators to begin patrolling a 1,500-kilometer stretch of border from Minnesota to Washington state. General John Priddy is in charge of the program. He says since 9/11, it's no longer an option to leave much of the Canada-U.S. border unprotected.
Whether they're terrorists or whether they're people smuggling drugs, guns, or money, if they don't go through the port, we don't want them.
A fleet of drones that Border Patrol has dubbed Southern Wing is already patrolling the entire U.S.-Mexican border. By 2016, the agency hopes to have its Northern Wing in full flight, patrolling the Canada-U.S. border 24/7.
And Bill Gillespie is here now to tell us more about this. I mean, it's quite fascinating. We were talking about, the fuel and the way it's designed. It's got to cost a lot of money. How much are we talking about here?
Well, of course, this is the same Predator B drone that's flying over Pakistan. This one, of course, doesn't have the Hellfire missiles, we hope. But it costs $10 million each. It's mostly fuel tank, that body, but highly sophisticated cameras. And the plan that the U.S. Border Agency has, and there appears to be a lot of political support for this in Washington, because, of course, even though the Americans are going through their debt crisis and cutting back on spending and so on, the one thing that the politicians and the people in America don't want is to cut back on security. Yeah. Their plan is to have, by 2016, 18 to 24 of these drones flying both the Mexican and Canadian borders. Also, there would be 4 bases, about 400 people at each base, so another 1,600 support personnel. I mean, you're already getting up over $200, $300, $400 million to keep track of the Canadian and American borders from the air.
Security aside, I understand what you're saying about, they don't want to cut back on security. They are grappling with this massive debt and $14 trillion, debt. They're fully operational, these drones over Mexico, but Canada?
Right, no, exactly. We're not Mexico.
Yeah, that was my first instinct. Why all this money to protect the border with Canada?
Right. Because it's not like thousands of Canadians are going to try to pour across the border into America as illegal aliens, as that's the major problem in Mexico, plus drugs. But for Canada, the U.S. looks at this really in a couple of ways. But one of them certainly is that they think that Canada is potentially a back door for terrorists to sneak into the U.S. and perpetrate another 9/11. So that's their major fear. But beyond that, after 9/11, they're looking at this border and they're saying, well, it is undefended for the most part. There's land borders, and we don't really know what's going on over all of those thousands of kilometers of border. We do know, of course, that there are also drugs coming from Canada to the U.S., so that's one thing I'm interested. But are guns being smuggled? They just don't know. So they're hoping to get a clear picture of what happens across the entire border and to reassure themselves.
Well, there's so much more I want to ask you about this. So will you stick around over the break and come back?
I will do.
Say you will.
I will do that.
Okay. We're going to talk about the fear factor when it comes to these drones and how much that is playing into this. So we'll be back with more from Bill Gillespie after this.